Lord, so we're recording. Start when you're ready.
All right. Hi, guys. How you doing, Zach? Don, you good?
Well, thanks yourself.
Yeah, going very good. Thanks, Rich. How you doing?
Yeah, not bad. Week 8, 9 of lockdown. It's all merging into one, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
I'm feeling.
let's talk about the future, shall we? Let's talk
Sounds
about
great.
the future of New Zealand rugby, South Africa rugby, and some Northern Hemisphere stuff as well, if you're feeling up for that.
For sure.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So I think the plan is we're going to quiz Zach on New Zealand, basically. We're going to quiz Don on South Africa, and then they're going to quiz me on Northern Hemisphere stuff, and we'll probably all chip in on all of it anyway. But Let's get stuck in. I've got a question to start you off here, Zach.
Sure.
Nice
Let's go.
So, let's talk selection, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really want to dwell too much on the World Cup because obviously New Zealand were pretty devastated from their loss to England. Were there selection errors? Now, this is something where I think people get it wrong. They may have picked their best team and still lost. People always assume that you lose because you get selection wrong. I mean, you could have changed selection and got it even worse, or you could have won. But basically, just for a little bit, can you tell me about selection in the World Cup? And then, but really going forward, who do you see staying in, going out? Big changes. I saw Sam Kane is your captain now, so he's obviously in.
Yep.
But who else? Who else should be in?
Okay, let's unpack this. So we'll start on the selection discussion. And this one's been covered to death, I think, in New Zealand, in that the general consensus is that they got the selections wrong. Now, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Easy to say in hindsight. It was actually the 10-14 did a really, really good video sometime back where they spoke about what it takes to win a Rugby World Cup. And they worked through things like number of caps. They worked through the importance of experience, all of these things. And I think that was something that was sorely missing from the squad overall. I think if you look at a number of the key positions, particularly in the backs, there were some big names that were omitted. But also I think New Zealand has been light in some areas for some time. So, I mean, I'll just run through the names. Big pick putting Richie Mo'unga there. Now, there were signs for me that maybe he would struggle under some of the intensity at the top level. That certainly came to bear, I think, in that semi-final. Ben Smith, an experienced guy. You've got two very inexperienced wingers there in that semi-final. I think they could have done with a cool head in the back line for sure. And experience, I guess, history shows that experience tells at Rugby World Cups. Then you look at a guy like Franks, more than 100 caps, didn't even make the squad. They'd chosen a very specific direction in terms of strategy. And ultimately, you look at that and say, well, it probably didn't pay off. Now, could he have made the difference? I don't think so. I think we're still quite light in the sixth position, blindside flank. I thought that's been quite a difficult. Well, between really it's go forward and the loose forwards has been a concern for some time, I think. So ultimately, I do think that we could have tinkered with some changes. We could have improved the back line, but probably the go forward was lacking. And that's ultimately what told on the day in the semi-final. So, yes, selections were wrong, but could it have made a difference? Maybe not.
Zach, was the big crunch when Mackenzie got injured and then there was that big crunch whether to stick or twist? And I was umming and ahhing in my videos and I erred on the side of Ben Smith at fullback and Beauden Barrett at 10, but they went all in with Mo'unga and Barrett. Do you think that was a mistake or it was the best option but just not good enough?
Well, the options were quite limited there, I think. I mean, you either choose two inexperienced wingers or you choose, an inexperienced 10 was the ultimate decision. I think you could have done a little bit better just by having Ben Smith there. So I would have elected to play him on the wing even, in place of either Reece or Bridge, have that experience there wider on the back line. Or, I mean, you're not going to lose too much by having him there at the back and Beauden at 10. So, yeah, I just think that in particular in the back line, that was a mistake and they should have elected more towards that experience.
Big calls on the wingers, weren't there? Very late calls.
Big late calls. And in saying that, I mean, and we'll get to this discussion later, but, job security for a New Zealand winger, it's one of the least secure jobs in New Zealand. Is there's always someone nipping at the heels. And in this case, there were two great young guys. Now, that's worked in the past. Worked with guys like Nehe Milner-Skudder in 2015. Obviously, Julian Severe, who came through young at the time. But unfortunately backfired a little bit with that lack of experience.
Well, British class. He is absolute class, no doubt.
Yep.
It was just a real late call, wasn't it? And it's hard enough.
It's a big call, and unfortunately, you live or die by those calls. It's one of those things. It could have been great, but it wasn't. I think ultimately, inexperience told the tale of that one.
So going forward, then, be bold. What are these changes?
Oh, be bold. Now, this is not a popular opinion in New Zealand. I'll say that first. But to me, the best 10 in the world is Beauden Barrett. Not for his goal kicking. I'll make that clear. So you need a goal kicking option. The discussion then becomes, well, who fits that 15 role now? Geordie, I think, is a great option, but he's failed somewhat on the big stage. Then you've got up-and-comers like David Havili. Obviously, Mackenzie is back in action. So I just think there's a lot of real good options there at 15. And having Beauden move back to 10, I think, is a bit more stable for my liking.
Something we were saying in our World 15 selection, weren't we? Everyone was after Beauden Barrett, and he's just a guy you want the ball in his hands all the time.
Yeah, I think so. And you probably want to take a little bit of that pressure off of him with the goal kicks, but you certainly want him touching the ball as much as possible. Now, I heard Foster saying that actually they've run the numbers and he touches the ball equally as much from fullback as he does from first five, which I found interesting. And that's probably because they're electing for more of a, I guess it's more of a spread attack there, left side or right side of the ruck, where the 15 is playing more of that dual playmaker role, same at 12. So that's an interesting point, but I just prefer you want a steady, one of your best players to steady the ship there. Mo'unga, for me, just wasn't up to the scratch when it came to, the cauldron and the pressure environments of the World Cup.
So you're saying Beauden Barrett goes back at 10 next season? Okay.
Yep, and let the best 15 emerge over time. There's three good options there that I've just named. Mo'unga is a good secondary option as a 10, but I certainly wouldn't hinge my next World Cup on Mo'unga, is my personal belief.
Geordie Barrett is class as well. He's a phenomenal player.
Yeah, he's proven even this year in Super Rugby, he's come on a little bit and looking pretty settled and looking really dangerous. But he's got a bad reputation in New Zealand because he's tried before and unfortunately failed in a couple of games. And New Zealand tend to remember that, unfortunately.
He's a young lad. He needs time.
Well, that's right. It's easy to thrust them forward, but give him a chance and let him develop, and let's see where he goes. Perfect bench player,
though, surely.
Perfect bench player. But there's a few guys that can fit that role. I mean, David Havili is another guy who's really, he's in Super Rugby, he plays pretty much every position. So he's a guy that if you were electing more towards a 6-2 split, that you could probably have there on your bench covering X number of positions. Yeah, and a bit of flexibility there. Enor, great player. Yep, great player. Yeah. I'm big on him. He sort of fits between that centre wing position. But he's definitely an up-and-comer one to watch. But I think Havili's probably got the inside running on the next All Blacks slot, whether it be starting at fullback or that utility player off the bench.
Okay. Any other selection before we move on? Any other big selection calls? Back row, number one?
Other big selection, I'll call it 6, is going to be very competitive. The next World Cup cycle. Guy that I'm hot on is Lachlan Boshier is his name.
Very good.
Can snatch for days, jackal for days. Probably needs to improve a little bit of his ball running, but he's one guy very dangerous over the ball, so that's a name to look out for.
So Bashir, Kane, Severe?
Severe would make the team. That's an 8. Yep. So 6, you'd go Bashir, and 7, obviously, captain Sam Kane. A few young guys coming through in the locks. There's a few names there, so I probably won't dive too many into those. And I think the centre pairings are looking quite settled with a couple of options that can supplement there. So, if I was to highlight some concerns, it would be 6 and 10 for me, and experience there in the back line. So.
Okay. All right, cool. So moving on, Don, any questions on New Zealand? I've got a couple, but your turn.
Yeah, it took me a while to find my questions again. They just seemed to disappear quite quickly. I was obviously, most of my news I get from Rugby Pass, and quite a few of those sites out there. And I've been noticing that now that Sky have bought Rugby Pass, it seems like the narrative of the sites changed a little bit. And there's been this huge big talk about obviously having a trans-Tasman competition as opposed to Super Rugby, saying Super Rugby's dead. I think we have the same story every week.
Yeah.
What are the feelings there in New Zealand on actual Super Rugby, and obviously just having a trans-Tasman competition with Australia as your only competition?
I think that discussion has developed more out of I guess, reality of the current climate in terms of travel and everything else. It just seems like the next likely option. My personal view on expansion versus, I guess, contraction of Super Rugby and of the Rugby Championship is I'm not a fan of expansion, continued expansion. I think it's proven that it hasn't worked at both Rugby Championship and at Super Rugby level. So, but my view, the best fit has always been the Super 12 and Super Rugby. I think that for me has given the best number of games. It's not diluting the product too much. There's enough there to have really, really skilled competitive teams, and you're reducing the burden there on the players, more importantly. So, yeah, that's more my view. I think that's probably a shared view. All the talk of this trans-Tasman comp has just been a short-term discussion as opposed to a long-term discussion. It's certainly not a fix. I mean, if anything, if we're looking at fixing the game from a commercial level, then you have to start really talking about how we integrate Japan into the conversation. But again, I'm just not a fan of the expansion idea. I think it's proven that it's been disastrous for Southern Hemisphere rugby in the past.
Did Super Rugby expand too fast? In your opinion?
For the markets, too fast for the markets. I mean, we'll get into this a bit later about where to next for global rugby, but I just think keep it very simple. Super 12. You could go 4 teams each, or we go back to 5-4-3. I think we originally had. Maybe look at reducing the numbers in the Rugby Championship as well, or the number of games at that sort of Southern Hemisphere competition, and make them more meaningful. I think you're more likely to get support and people in behind it. One of the big differences now I see between just one last point between Northern Hemisphere rugby and Southern Hemisphere rugby right now is tribalism of fans to their teams. We've lost that a little bit in Southern Hemisphere rugby. So my idea about how to really focus on that.
From a Northern Hemisphere point of view, in the Rugby Championship, fantastic games. But personally, I don't like repeated games. I don't like New Zealand playing Australia. 3 times do they play?
Yeah, they include the Bledisloe Cup. It's all just a bit repetitive. Yeah. So
I want one game, everything riding on it. That's what I want to see.
Yeah,
but I don't know what it's like down there.
Yeah, I'd go back to 2. I mean, we've discussed this, Don, but I'd go back to 2 games for the Bledisloe Cup. I mean, that does mean something down here, but 3's too many. And try and build a few more local rivalries rather than, trying to press the product a little bit too much and, overexpand.
I think the other idea is if you're going to play 2 games against New Zealand, that you play them in South Africa 1 year and then the following year you play it in New Zealand. So it creates a bit of, because then you don't get to see the Springboks every year.
Yep.
Or the All Blacks every year. It just creates a little bit more of a spectacle, closer to a tour as opposed to what it is at the moment.
Well, we had a collaboration where we spoke about that, Don, and then a couple of weeks later they announced that that's where they're heading, which was interesting. But yeah, it just creates more of a spectacle, gets more of the buy-in from the public, and makes more meaningful encounters than this repetitive product, I'll say.
Yeah, you want huge games with everything riding on them. That's what you want, isn't it?
Yeah, that's certainly proven to be effective for the Six Nations. You get one chance, you win or die by the result,
Yeah, okay. Should we move on to another quick question? Not this quick one here, Zach. New Zealand question. What's the deal with Rico Ioane? What's the deal? I've heard loads of things, party, form, some things I like, some things I don't like. Is he coming back? What's the deal?
A short answer for me is no, he's not coming back. And that's just my personal view. As I mentioned, job security for New Zealand wingers is, it's very, very low. There's a couple of young guys nipping at his heels. I don't think possibly it was an attitude thing, as he was a very, very young player. Now I think it's just purely form, and in particular, just a low work rate. He's just not throwing himself in amongst it as much. He's also started moving more towards a centre option at Super Rugby level, which for his skill set, I don't like it, to be honest. I think there's still a place for specialist wingers. I think that if he could focus more on the core strengths of a winger, and in particular some of the defensive stuff, he could mold his game similar to a Mapimpi, I think, is where he would have the most success. Strong finisher, high work rate, good defender. To me, that's the key to his success and to coming back in the All Blacks. The problem is he's moving more towards a utility player with a focus on the centres as opposed to a specialist winger.
Yeah, it's just strange from us up in the Northern Hemisphere. He was literally the best thing ever, a couple of seasons ago, and then all of a sudden completely off the radar. On form, I understand, but it just didn't make sense.
Well, he's part of the production line, unfortunately, in that there's always, every few years, there's another guy who sort of steps up and takes that mantle. He in particular, he certainly lit the world on fire when he was, at the top of his game. I just think the path he's following now is not the right path for him to get back into the All Blacks. It's just my personal opinion.
No, I agree, because then you're playing in the same pool as ALB, and he just doesn't have the same skill set.
Yeah, and you've got young guys like Enor coming through as well, centre wing combination. Then you've got utility guys who offer more utility value, like David Havili. It's just to me, it's just the wrong option if he wants to get back into the New Zealand squad.
Okay, right. Let's quickly. Anything else on New Zealand? I've got one more quick one. Don, you got another one?
No, mine were based. Actually, no, I do have one. It's pretty difficult. It's still early days, but obviously, you got Foster as the new All Black captain. What are your views? Not captain, coach. What are your views on that? I'm a big fan of Razor. I think he's exceptional. So, do you think it was time to maybe try something new, or just the same old, same old? And I don't mean same old in a bad way.
Yeah. I think, the general consensus is that they got this one wrong, that it's more of the same, that we're going to see repeat of the old resume. My personal view, there's something to be said for maintaining the All Blacks IP. So I'm actually a fan of the Foster appointment myself. I just think the culture means something, and having a guy that's been in that environment, led in that environment, and developed in that environment, that's big for me in terms of my selection criteria. What I'll say as a glass half full view, though, is that if Foster doesn't perform, there's two guys, really, really good guys waiting in the wings, I expect, in the next couple of years. So from that perspective, New Zealand rugby is actually in a good position as far as coaches go, possibly impacting the next World Cup cycle, maybe. But if he doesn't perform, he's in a 2-year contract, then you've got Razor there, or hopefully we can port someone like Gatlin into the role. So I prefer to look at it that way. I personally favour having that experience in the environment, the All Blacks environment, and I personally think that if it doesn't work out, there's another good option there.
That's a huge amount of pressure on Foster, isn't it? Just huge.
Oh, it's long been known that the All Blacks coach is one of the most lonely jobs in New Zealand. That's for sure.
Okay. Well, just finishing off here then, Zach. Let's talk really in the future threats to New Zealand rugby. Now, the All Black brand is the biggest in the world, easily. But the draws of the European leagues, of Japan, of big money, it looks like it's slowly pulling players away a bit sooner than it has in before. Where's the tipping point where the All Blacks actually start losing players that they want in their team? At the moment, it's the fringe guys. Yeah. But is there a tipping point? Is it coming, or is it okay?
Well, they're scrambling to try and do something about it more at the commercial end, to get more money into New Zealand rugby so they can keep some of those players. My personal view on this, the pull towards the north, it impacts certainly at the development level and the Super Rugby level. Most of the guys at the top, they're earning decent enough that, if you're talking 20% difference, they might elect to stay for the jersey. So I don't see it impacting that much on the All Blacks themselves, but I do think it starts to hamper the long-term development in New Zealand rugby. So to solve the problem, it has to be focused on commercial viability, so that we can actually retain players in Super Rugby and at the development level. And unfortunately,
you happy with players popping off for a year or two? Like, say Retallick pops off for a year or two and comes back. Yeah, that's fine.
Yep, that's been fine, but they've limited it to some of the top players. Dan Carter used to do it. Go on a sabbatical. Other players, Brodie Retallick, they've limited it to those top players. I think they need to be a bit smarter and open it up to some of the development guys as well. Go away, learn something in the North, make a bit of money, and then come back and give back to New Zealand rugby. To me, that's a better fit. So they do need to adapt with the times, I think, is the summary.
Okay, great. So I think let's wrap that one up then. So that's New Zealand. Any comments below on what Zach's been talking about? If you agree, disagree, selection, threats, things going forward, if Foster's the right appointment.